The click of Patricia Donovan's heels on my hardwood floor always sounded like a countdown. I heard it that Saturday morning before I heard her voice, that particular rhythm of a woman who had never once knocked on a door she believed she had the right to walk through. I was in my office, 3 tabs deep into a client's quarterly numbers, and some part of me already knew this wasn't going to be a good morning. It never was, when she came alone. "My name is Kyle Harrison. I'm 34 years old. And for 3 years I have been paying $6,600 a month to keep a roof over the head of a woman who believed I was living under her son's charity. I want you to sit with that number for a second, because everything that happened after started with it. $6,600, every single month, out of my account, into a mortgage that had my name on it and nobody else's. Patricia didn't know that. Her son Andrew didn't know that. As far as the Donovan family was concerned, I was the guy who married into money he didn't have, living rent-free in a house that belonged to somebody better than me. I should back up. I married Jennifer Donovan 3 years ago, on a warm October afternoon that felt, at the time, like the beginning of something uncomplicated. She was smart, sharp-witted, the kind of woman who could walk into a boardroom and rearrange the power in it without raising her voice. She ran marketing for a mid-sized healthcare company and she was good at it. The kind of good that gets you promoted twice in 4 years. I fell for her fast and I fell for her hard, and I want to be clear about that now, because everything that came later doesn't erase it. I loved her. I still do, in the complicated way you love someone after you've seen the parts of them they tried to keep hidden. What I didn't fall for, not even a little, was her family. The Donovans operated less like a family and more like a corporation with a very clear org chart, and Jennifer was permanently stuck in middle management. At the top sat Andrew, 37, a pharmaceutical sales representative who had spent most of his 30s collecting bachelor stories instead of a resume, and who had somehow still been anointed the family's crown prince. Below him, technically, was Jennifer. And below her was Michael, 28, perpetually between startups, the family's designated work in progress. I met the hierarchy in full for the first time at a Sunday dinner 4 months into dating Jennifer, at Patricia's dining table. Under a chandelier that was slightly too large for the room. I remember it because it was the night I first understood what Jennifer had grown up competing against. Andrew closed another territory this quarter, Patricia announced, setting down a casserole dish like she was presenting a trophy. Regional director by 38, mark my words. That's great, Jennifer said, and I watched something small and practiced happen in her face, a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. And how's the marketing world treating you, dear? Patricia asked, not quite looking at her. Good. We launched the Meridian campaign, it's actually tracking really. That's nice. Patricia had already turned to me. Kyle, Andrew tells me consulting can be very hit or miss. Is that stressful for you? Not knowing where the next check is coming from? I told her it wasn't, that the firm was doing well, that I had more clients than I could comfortably take on. She nodded the way you nod at a child who has just explained why the sky is blue. Pleasant, unconvinced, already thinking about something else. Andrew, across the table, gave me a look I would come to know very well over the next 3 years. Not hostile, just amused, the look of a man who has never once doubted his own gravity. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that Jennifer had enough to deal with without me making her family dinners tense. That became a habit, then it became a pattern. Then, without my ever quite deciding it, it became the architecture of my entire marriage. When Jennifer and I bought the house in Riverside Park, 4 bedrooms, a yard shaded by oak trees, the kind of street where the lawns all look professionally jealous of each other, I paid for it outright with money I'd built over a decade of underselling myself to people like Patricia. Jennifer sat me down 2 weeks before we moved in, her hand on my arm, her voice careful in a way I should have paid closer attention to. Can we just tell them Andrew's letting us stay here for a while? She'd asked. Just until things settle. My mom gets weird about money, about who's doing better than who. It's not about you, Kyle, I promise. It's just easier. Easier. I said yes to easier so many times over the next 3 years that I stopped noticing I was saying it at all. So that was the lie. Not a lie I told, but a lie I let live in my house, rent-free, for 3 years, while I paid $6,600 a month to keep it standing. Which brings me back to that Saturday morning, and the sound of Patricia's heels on my stairs. Jennifer was at yoga. I was alone with my laptop and a stack of numbers that suddenly didn't matter anymore, because Patricia appeared in my office doorway wearing one of those structured blazers she wore like armor, arms crossed. chin already tilted into the posture of a woman who had rehearsed what she was about to say. "Kyle," she said, "we need to talk." Patricia didn't wait for an invitation. She walked past me into the office and lowered herself into the chair across from my desk. "The way you sit down when you already believe the outcome of a conversation before it starts." She crossed her legs at the ankle, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me with an expression I'd seen 100 times before, patient, pitying, the look of a woman about to explain something to someone she assumes won't fully understand it. "Good morning, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice easy. "Jennifer's at yoga. She'll be back in an hour if you want to wait." "I'm not here for Jennifer," she said. "I'm here for you. About the house." I felt it then, a small, cold drop somewhere behind my ribs, the first sign that whatever was coming was going to matter. I didn't let it show. 3 years of Sunday dinners had taught me how to keep my face still while something inside me quietly rearranged itself. "What about the house?" I asked. She leaned forward, hands still clasped, the posture of a woman delivering difficult news she'd already decided wasn't actually difficult at all. "Andrew and Stephanie are expecting. They found out last week. It's early, but they're already thinking about the future. About giving their child a real home." "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it, for about half a second, before I understood where this was going. "It is," Patricia agreed. "But you know that condo they're in downtown, it's no place for a baby. 2 bedrooms, no yard, that tiny elevator. They need space. They need exactly this." She lifted one hand and gestured slowly around my office. At the crown molding, the bay window, the yard visible beyond the glass, presenting my own house to me like she was showing a client a listing. "This house that Andrew owns would be perfect for them. I want you to understand something about that moment." I had 6 seconds, maybe 7, before I said anything back to her, and in those seconds my mind did something I can only describe as triage. I thought about the deed sitting in my filing cabinet 2 feet from where she was sitting. I thought about 36 months of wire transfers, $6,600 each, leaving my account on the first of every month like clockwork. I thought about every dinner where Andrew had been praised for a house he'd never paid a dollar toward, and I thought, very clearly, very calmly, that I was not going to raise my voice in this room. Not yet, not until I understood exactly how far this had gone. "Andrew owns this house?" I said, and I let the words come out flat, curious, almost gentle. "Of course he does." Patricia said it the way you'd correct a child who'd gotten a simple fact wrong. "He bought it 3 years ago, right before your wedding. He's been generous enough to let you and Jennifer stay here while he traveled for work, but now that he's starting a family of his own, he needs it back. Surely you understand that." I understood a great deal in that moment. I understood that my wife had built an entire structure of lies sturdy enough to hold 3 years of Sunday dinners, birthday parties, and holiday visits without a single crack showing. I understood that Patricia wasn't lying to me. She genuinely believed every word coming out of her mouth. And I understood, watching her hands stay perfectly still in her lap while she said it, that she had absolutely no idea she was sitting in a house I had built with a decade of my own work, asking me to leave it so her favorite child could raise a family inside my life. "When does Andrew need us out?" I asked. Something in her shoulders eased, the relief of a woman who'd expected a fight and gotten cooperation instead. "Stephanie's due in 7 months. So they'd like to move in within the next 30 days. That gives you plenty of time to find a nice apartment. Something more suitable, really, for a young couple without children yet." Something more suitable. I let that phrase sit in the room for a second before I responded, because I wanted to see if she'd hear how it sounded out loud. She didn't. She just watched me, waiting for me to accept the terms she'd already decided were generous. 30 days, I repeated. "That's a very specific number. Andrew didn't want to rush you," she said, standing now, smoothing the front of her blazer. "He's been more than patient, letting the 2 of you live here rent-free all this time. The least you can do is be gracious about it, now that he actually needs the house for his own family." Rent-free. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was something much less controlled, and I wasn't ready to let that out yet. "Patricia," I said slowly, "has Andrew ever shown you the deed to this house?" Her brow furrowed, the first crack of uncertainty I'd seen all morning. "Why would he need to do that? I was there when he bought it. I helped with the down payment." That detail landed harder than she meant it to. "How much did you give him?" "That's between Andrew and me," she said, straightening, some of her authority snapping back into place like a rubber band. "The point is, this is his house, and he needs it. I'm sure the 2 of you will find something perfectly nice, maybe out in the suburbs. Somewhere the rent's a little more manageable on your consulting income. Consulting income. She said the word consulting the way people say hobby, and I understood, in that instant, exactly what story Jennifer had been telling her family about my career for the last 3 years. I filed that away too. I'll talk to Jennifer about it, I said, and I made sure my voice carried nothing but calm agreement. Patricia smiled, satisfied, already halfway to the door. Good, I'll let Andrew know you were reasonable about this. He was worried there'd be some kind of scene. I told him you weren't the type. She left the way she'd arrived, heels clicking down the stairs, car pulling out of the driveway a few minutes later, and I sat alone in my office not moving, listening to the house settle into silence around me. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't rage, not yet. It was something quieter and colder than rage. It was clarity. I stood up, walked to the filing cabinet in the corner of my office, and pulled open the second drawer. My hand found the folder before my eyes did, worn at the corners from 3 years of use, the tab still labeled in my own handwriting. Real estate. I set it on my desk and opened it slowly, the way you open something you already know the contents of but need to see again anyway. The deed was on top, my name printed alone in the space for ownership, dated 3 years earlier, 3 months before my wedding. Beneath it, 36 months of bank statements, each one showing the same transfer on the same date, $6,600, month after month after month, rent and utilities and property taxes, every payment that had kept this house standing and this family believing whatever they needed to believe. I sat there with the folder open in front of me for a long time, staring at my own name on a piece of paper that apparently meant nothing to the people who'd been living inside the story my wife had built around it, and somewhere in that silence, I stopped being surprised and started deciding what came next. I heard her car in the driveway a little after 10, the engine cutting off, the door slamming with the particular cheerfulness of a person who has no idea their morning is about to end differently than it began. By the time she came through the kitchen door, flushed from yoga, hair pulled back, water bottle in hand, I had already closed the folder and set it on the table in front of the chair across from mine. I hadn't decided to leave it there as a message, I just hadn't found a reason to hide it. Hey, babe, she said, crossing to the fridge, pulling out a fresh bottle even though the one in her hand was still half full. Did you get a lot of work done this morning? Your mother stopped by, I said. She paused with her hand still on the fridge door, and I watched something flicker behind her eyes, not surprise exactly, more like the particular alertness of someone who has been waiting 3 years for a phone call they hope would never come. Oh, she said, too lightly. What did she want? She came to tell me that Andrew needs us out in 30 days. So he and Stephanie can raise their baby in the house he owns. The water bottle slipped out of her hand. It hit the tile with a hollow plastic thud and rolled, water spreading out in a slow, widening sheet across the floor between us, and neither of us moved to stop it. I watched it reach the edge of the cabinet and pool there, and some part of my brain, the part that was still functioning like a person doing math instead of a person watching his marriage come apart, thought, that's going to stain the grout if she doesn't clean it up soon. She didn't clean it up. She just stood there, both hands empty now, staring at me across the kitchen like she was trying to figure out how much I already knew. Kyle, I can explain. Explain what? My voice came out steadier than I expected, almost gentle, which I think frightened her more than shouting would have. Explain why your mother thinks your brother owns a house I've paid $6,600 a month for. Explain why your entire family believes I've been living here for 3 years off Andrew's charity. Jennifer's face went the color of the tile under her feet. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly, like her legs had made the decision without asking her, and for a moment she didn't say anything at all. I want to be fair here, because even in that moment, watching the folder sit between us like an accusation, I could see something in her that wasn't just guilt. It was fear, old and familiar, the kind that gets built into a person over decades rather than years. I'd seen flashes of it before, at family dinners, in the careful way she'd navigate any conversation that touched her mother's approval. I just hadn't understood, until that morning, how far she'd let that fear reach into our marriage. My family, she started, then stopped, then tried again. You don't understand what it's like. Andrew has always been the one who does everything right, the one mom brags about, and I've spent my whole life just slightly behind him, no matter what I actually accomplish. When we got married, when you bought this house, I panicked. I couldn't tell them the truth, that you were doing better than Andrew ever had. My mother would have made it a competition. She would have made Andrew feel small, and then Andrew would have made me feel like I'd done something wrong by outshining him, and it felt easier to let them believe the house was his. Easier, I repeated, So instead your family thinks I'm a charity case. That your brother is generously letting a grown man live in a house he can't afford on his own. I never said you were a failure. You didn't have to say it, Jennifer. You just let them build the story and you stood there and let it stand for 3 years. I kept my voice level, but something underneath it was starting to shift, cold turning slowly into something with more heat behind it. I sat through Sunday dinners listening to your mother praise Andrew for his generosity toward us. I sat there and smiled while your father gave me advice about working harder, about being a better provider. Like I was some kind of project. And the whole time I was the one paying for the roof over everyone's heads while your family talked about me like I was barely keeping up. I know, she whispered, and her eyes were filling now, tears sliding down before she could stop them. I know how that sounds. I hate how that sounds. But you don't know what it's like growing up compared to him every single day of your life. Every report card, every job, every relationship, it always came back to how it measured up to Andrew. I told myself I was protecting the peace. I told myself I'd find the right time to tell them the truth. 3 years is not the right time, Jennifer. 3 years is a decision you made over and over again, every single month, every single dinner, every single time you could have said something and chose silence instead. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, and behind her, on the wall above the kitchen table, our wedding photo hung in its frame, the two of us laughing on a beach in October. Sunlight catching the edge of her dress, both of us looking like people who had no idea what the next 3 years would cost. I found myself staring at it while she talked, at the version of us that still believed the story we were telling each other. I was trying to keep the peace, she said again, quieter now. You don't understand how competitive my family is. If they knew the truth, that you were paying for everything, it would have caused so many problems. Problems for who? I asked, because from where I'm sitting, the only person with a problem right now is me. I'm the one your mother just told to pack up and leave my own house. I'm the one who spent 3 years being quietly humiliated at every family gathering so your brother could keep his crown. And I'm the one sitting here right now, finding out my wife let it happen, and was apparently prepared to keep letting it happen, even today, even when your mother stood in my office and told me to get out. Jennifer reached across the table for my hand. I didn't pull it away immediately, some old reflex still working in me even now, but I didn't take it either. And after a second she withdrew, hurt flickering across her face like I'd confirmed something she'd feared. Kyle, please, I was going to tell them. I just needed to figure out how, without everything blowing up. You've had 3 years to figure out how, I said. The fact that you still hadn't found a way tells me everything I need to know about where I actually rank in your priorities. What are you going to do? She asked, and her voice had gone small in a way I'd rarely heard from her. The voice of someone bracing for something they already suspected was coming. I looked at her for a long moment, at the woman I had built a life with, who I had genuinely believed I knew completely, and felt the strange vertigo of realizing how much of that life had been built on a story she'd let other people believe. The water was still spreading slowly across the tile between us. The wedding photo still hung above the table, two strangers smiling at a future they hadn't earned yet. I'm going to give your mother exactly what she asked for, I said. Sunday morning, I woke up before the sun and made 2 phone calls before I'd even had coffee. The first was to a relocation company that specialized in fast, discreet moves, the kind of service wealthy people use during divorces, when speed matters more than sentiment. The second was to Martin Crawford, my real estate attorney, who picked up on the third ring sounding like a man who already suspected his weekend was about to get complicated. Kyle, he said, what can I do for you? I need to list my house immediately, I said, and I need to understand exactly where I stand legally regarding Jennifer's access to it while we sort things out. There was a pause on the line, the kind that meant he was choosing his next words carefully. Are we talking about a divorce, Kyle? We're talking about clarity, I said. The house is mine, sole name on the deed, purchased before the marriage. I want everything documented and airtight before this goes any further. Property decisions made in anger get expensive, Martin said quietly. Take a breath before you do anything you can't undo. I'm not angry, I told him, and it was mostly true. What I felt that morning wasn't anger anymore. Anger is loud and messy and burns itself out fast. What I felt was something colder and more durable, the kind of resolve that doesn't need to raise its voice to be taken seriously. I'm thinking clearly, for the first time in 3 years, actually. Jennifer left for her parents' house around noon for what was supposed to be a normal Sunday dinner, the kind of ordinary family gathering that had quietly been costing me my dignity for 3 years. She kissed me on the cheek on her way out the door, told me she loved me, said we'd talk more when she got back. I said okay. I didn't tell her what was about to happen in the house she'd be walking back into that evening. Because by then, I didn't feel like I owed her a warning anymore. The movers arrived 40 minutes after her car pulled out of the driveway. I'd spent the morning sorting the house into 3 piles in my head: mine, hers, and shared, walking room to room with a legal pad, making decisions I never imagined I'd have to make about a life I thought was permanent. My clothes, my office equipment, the desk I'd bought before we were even engaged, the leather chair that had held me through a decade of building a business from nothing. My books, my father's old watch collection, the framed photo of my parents that had sat on my nightstand since before I met Jennifer at all. Everything that had made this house feel like it belonged to me, separate from anything Andrew or Patricia or the story Jennifer had built could touch. I left her things exactly where they were. Her clothes still hung in the closet in careful color-coded rows. Her toiletries lined the bathroom counter the way they always had, an untouched little museum of her morning routine. The decorative pillows she'd picked out for the couch, the ones I'd never liked and never said so, stayed stacked exactly where she'd left them. I wasn't trying to punish her by taking things. I was only taking what was unquestionably, undeniably mine, and letting the rest of the house stand as proof that I hadn't come here to destroy anything. Just to leave it. The movers worked with the quiet efficiency of men who did this often enough to know not to ask questions. Boxes down the stairs, furniture wrapped and carried out through the front door I'd walked through 1,000 times as if it were simply mine, no qualifiers attached. I stood in the doorway of what had been my office and watched 2 men lift the leather chair between them, and for just a second, one single second I wasn't proud of, I almost told them to put it back. Not because I doubted what I was doing. Because that chair had been in the room the night I proposed to Jennifer, sitting across from her at this same desk with a ring in my pocket and no idea what the next 3 years would actually look like. I let the moment pass. I nodded at the movers, and they carried it out to the truck. By 5 o'clock, the house was half mine and half a stranger's, my side stripped down to bare walls and empty shelves, her side untouched, frozen exactly as she'd left it that morning. I did one last walk through, room by room, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything that actually mattered. In the office, I sat down at the one thing I hadn't taken, the desk we'd bought together after the wedding, and I wrote a note by hand instead of typing it, because some things deserve ink instead of pixels. I left it inside the manila folder, on top of the deed and 3 years of bank statements, so there'd be no confusion about what she was looking at. Patricia came by yesterday to tell me Andrew needs his house back. I'm complying. I think there's some confusion about ownership, though. The attached documents should clear that up. I've moved my things to a new place downtown. The house goes on the market tomorrow. We'll need to talk about what happens next. Kyle, I set my house keys on top of the folder, turned off the lights room by room like I was closing up a business for the last time, and walked out through the front door without looking back at the yard, the porch, the life that had lived inside those 4 bedrooms for 3 years. My new apartment was a 20-minute drive downtown, a high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, the kind of place that cost more per month than the mortgage I'd been carrying, but came with no in-laws holding a spare key. I spent the evening unpacking boxes in near silence, the city lights slowly replacing daylight outside the glass. Each box I opened a small, strange reminder that I was building a life from scratch in a matter of hours. Somewhere around 7, my phone lit up with Jennifer's name. I let it ring out. It rang again almost immediately. I let that one go too. Then the text started, fast and frantic, stacking on top of each other on my screen. Kyle, where are you? Why are all your things gone? My mother is losing her mind right now. Kyle, please answer your phone. I turned it face down on the counter and kept unpacking. It was almost 8 when the knock came. I checked the building's security app before I opened the door, an unnecessary precaution in a place with this much security. But a habit from a life that suddenly felt like it required more caution than it used to. Jennifer stood in the hallway on the small grainy screen, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, arms wrapped tight around herself like she was cold in a hallway that wasn't. I opened the door. You left, she said, her voice cracking on the second word. You actually left. Behind her, the hallway light caught the wet streaks on her face, and for just a moment I felt something soften in my chest, old muscle memory. 3 years of loving this woman refusing to switch off overnight. I didn't let it show. Your mother told me to move out, I said. I was just following instructions. You know that's not what I mean. Her voice was rising now, fear and disbelief tangled together. You took everything. You left a note about the deed sitting right there on the desk for anyone to find. Kyle, my whole family is in chaos right now, do you understand that? I imagine they are, I said, stepping back to let her in. Because whatever else was true, I wasn't going to have this conversation in a hallway. Finding out that everything you believed about someone's life was a lie tends to do that. She walked past me into the apartment, and I watched her take it in, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the river glittering below, the furniture that was entirely, unmistakably mine, a life assembled in a single afternoon that already looked more permanent than 3 years in a house that was never allowed to be ours in front of anyone who mattered to her. She stood in the doorway of the living room, both hands pressed against her mouth for a second before she found the words. "You actually left," she said again, quieter this time, like she was only now starting to understand it was true. Jennifer sat on my new couch for another 20 minutes that night, and by the time she left, my phone had already started lighting up with a different kind of message entirely, not from her, but from the rest of her family, each one landing like a small detonation across a group chat I hadn't asked to be part of but couldn't escape either. Patricia's first message came in at 9:15. "Kyle, there has clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. We need to sit down like adults and sort this out. You cannot simply put Andrew's house on the market without speaking to him first. This is deeply unreasonable of you." I read it twice, mostly for the audacity of it, this woman still calling it Andrew's house in the same breath as accusing me of being unreasonable. 3 years of my money holding up a lie she still hadn't fully absorbed yet. Robert, Jennifer's father, sent something more measured an hour later, the kind of message you'd expect from a man who'd spent 30 years being the family's designated peacekeeper. "Kyle, I think we all need to take a breath here. Whatever's happened between you and Jennifer, dragging property and money into it only makes things worse for everyone. Call me when you're ready to talk like reasonable men." I didn't call him. I wasn't in the mood to be reasonable on anyone's schedule but my own. Andrew's texts were the ones that told me everything I needed to know about the man himself. They started polite enough, if you could call barely restrained condescension polite. "Kyle, I think there's some confusion here. That house is mine. Mom helped me buy it. I've let you and Jennifer stay there out of family generosity, and now you're trying to sell it out from under me?" By the third message, the mask had slipped entirely. "You think you can just steal my house? My lawyer's going to hear about this. You owe my family an explanation. Who the hell do you think you are?" I stared at that last line for a long time before I typed anything back, because it was, in its own way, the most honest question anyone in that family had asked me in 3 years. Who did I think I was? I typed one response, short, and sent it before I could talk myself out of it. "I'm the man whose name is on the deed, Andrew. Check the county records if you don't believe me. Then call your mother and ask her how much of your down payment actually went toward a house that was never yours." He called me 11 minutes later. I let it ring twice before I answered, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted him to sit in that silence a little longer, the same way I'd been sitting in silence for 3 years while his family built a version of me that didn't exist. "You think this is funny?" Andrew's voice came through sharp and fast, no preamble, no pretense of civility left. "You think you can humiliate me in front of my own family and just walk away clean?" "I haven't humiliated anyone," I said, keeping my voice level, the same voice I'd used with his mother a week earlier. "I put my house on the market. My name, my deed, my money. If the truth is humiliating, that's not something I did to you, Andrew. That's something you and Jennifer built for yourselves 3 years ago, and let stand. That house was supposed to be mine eventually," he snapped. "Mom gave me 30 grand for a down payment, and Jennifer said I could tell everyone it was mine to save face. That was the deal." "The deal," I repeated. "You mean the lie. And you took $30,000 from your mother under false pretenses and spent it on something else entirely, didn't you? While letting her believe you'd bought a house. I think that's the part your lawyer's going to have a much harder time explaining than anything I've done." There was a long pause on the line, and for the first time since I'd known him, Andrew didn't have a quick, easy answer ready. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said finally, but the certainty had drained out of his voice. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said. "I've been paying $6,600 a month for 3 years to keep a roof over a story you got to take credit for. So no, Andrew, I'm not interested in your lawyer, and I'm not interested in explaining myself to a man who let his mother believe a fiction instead of doing something as simple as telling the truth. The house is listed. It sells to whoever offers the most. That's not theft. That's ownership." I hung up before he could answer, and for a moment I just stood at my window, phone still warm in my hand, watching the lights of the city stretch out toward the river, and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't expected. Not triumph exactly, Just quiet, the particular quiet that comes after you've finally said something you should have said years ago. The listing had gone live that afternoon, before Andrew's call, before Patricia's messages. Before any of it, Martin had warned me that Riverside Park properties didn't sit long on the market, and he wasn't wrong. By 2 in the afternoon, the sign was staked into the front lawn, the same lawn Patricia had once stood on describing how perfect it would be for Andrew's family, and by 5 o'clock we had 3 offers, all above asking. I pictured it without needing to see it, the moving trucks from the day before long gone, the house standing there half empty and fully mine, a for sale sign catching the evening light while somewhere across town. Jennifer's family group chat lit up their phones one after another with the news. I accepted the highest offer that evening, a cash buyer relocating from California, 30 days to close. Clean, fast, exactly what I needed. I signed the digital paperwork at my kitchen counter, alone, the apartment quiet except for the low hum of the city outside my windows, and when it was done, I set my phone down and just sat there for a minute. I want to be honest about that moment, because it wasn't the clean, satisfying ending you'd expect from a story like this. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, and underneath the tired, something quieter and harder to name, a small ache for the life I thought I was building in that house, the one that had never actually been what I believed it was. I let myself feel that for exactly as long as it took to finish the glass of water in front of me. Then I stood up, rinsed the glass, and went to bed, because whatever came next with Jennifer, with her family, with the marriage I still didn't know if I wanted to save, I was going to face it as the man who owned his own house, and not the one who'd spent 3 years pretending he didn't. Jennifer showed up at my apartment that evening looking like she hadn't slept in days, and it turned out she hadn't. "You actually did it," she said when I opened the door. "You sold the house, accepted an offer," I corrected. "We close in 30 days. Kyle, please, can we just talk about this?" I let her in, and we sat across from each other in my living room like 2 strangers negotiating terms neither of them wanted to agree to. "My family is falling apart," she said. "Andrew's threatening to sue you. My mother's having some kind of breakdown. My father's trying to mediate and nobody's listening to him. Even Michael's involved now, and he thinks the whole thing is hilarious, which is not helping anyone." "None of that is my problem," I said. "Yes, it is. You're my husband. My family is your family. Your family spent 3 years treating me like I didn't matter," I said. "They built an entire fiction about my life and never once asked if it was true. Why should I care that the fiction is falling apart now?" She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped into something rawer, less rehearsed. "Because I'm asking you to. Because I'm your wife, and I'm asking you to let me try to fix this." "On whose terms?" I asked. "Because fixing it on your family's terms means going back to pretending. It means letting Andrew keep taking credit for my life. It means smiling through your mother's condescension so everyone stays comfortable. I'm done being invisible so the story stays clean." "That's not what I'm asking," Jennifer said. "I'm asking you to let me tell them the truth. All of it, not to manage it, not to soften it, just say it, out loud, in front of everyone, and let them deal with what that means." I studied her for a long moment. There was something different in her face that night. Not the panic from the kitchen, not the desperation from my doorway. Something steadier, like she'd finally run out of room to keep running from it. "Then do it," I said. "But I'm not coming with you. This one's yours to carry." She told me about it 3 days later, sitting at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, and she told it slowly, like she was still trying to process it herself. She'd called a family dinner, she said, which in itself had been strange enough to put everyone on edge before she'd said a single word. Patricia had made a roast, the good china had come out, and Andrew had shown up with Stephanie, oblivious, still under the impression this was about wedding gifts or baby names or something equally harmless. Jennifer said she'd waited until dessert, until the table had gone quiet in that particular way families go quiet when they sense something's coming, and then she just said it. "I told them Kyle bought the house," Jennifer said. "Not Andrew. That Kyle's been paying every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every dollar of property tax for 3 years, and that I let everyone believe it was Andrew's because I didn't want to watch Mom love me less than she loves him." She said Patricia had gone very still, the way people go still right before something breaks. "That's not true," Patricia had said. "Andrew, tell her that's not true." Andrew hadn't said anything at first. Jennifer said he just stared at his plate, jaw working, and when he finally spoke it wasn't a denial. It was worse. The down payment money was for something else, he admitted. "Not the house. I never actually bought it. I told you all it was mine because it was easier than explaining what happened. Easier than explaining what happened, Robert had repeated, according to Jennifer, his voice flat with disbelief. You took $30,000 from your mother and let this family live inside a lie for 3 years because it was easier. Jennifer said that was the moment Patricia's hands had started shaking, holding her water glass so tight Jennifer thought it might crack. You let me stand in that man's office, Patricia said, and Jennifer told me she'd never heard her mother's voice sound like that before, small and stripped of all its usual authority, and tell him to leave his own house. You let me humiliate myself in front of him because you didn't have the courage to tell me the truth. I'm sorry, Jennifer had said, and meant it, but sorry didn't undo 3 years. Michael, Jennifer told me, had been the only one at the table who didn't look shocked. He'd leaned back in his chair with something that wasn't quite a smile, more like the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd been waiting years to be proven right. I always wondered how Andrew afforded that lifestyle on a pharma sales salary, he'd said. Watches, the car, the trips. Guess now we know it wasn't real either. Nobody asked you, Andrew had snapped. Nobody had to, Michael said. I've been watching this family worship you for a house you never bought while Kyle actually built something real and got treated like the family charity case for it. It was only a matter of time before it caught up with you. Jennifer said the table had gone silent after that, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses down on a room. Patricia hadn't spoken again for the rest of dinner. Andrew had left early, Stephanie trailing after him looking like she'd wandered into someone else's war. Robert had sat there for a long time afterward, according to Jennifer, just staring at the wreckage of the roast on his plate, saying nothing at all. Which somehow felt worse than if he'd yelled. How do you feel? I asked her, once she'd finished. Exhausted, she said, but lighter, too. Like I've been carrying something heavy for 3 years and I finally set it down, even if I don't know yet what it broke on the way down. She wrapped both hands around her cooling coffee and looked at me across the counter, and for the first time since Patricia had walked into my office that Saturday morning, I saw something in her face that looked less like guilt and more like exhaustion finally giving way to honesty. Kyle, she said quietly, I know I don't have any right to ask you this, but is there any chance we can fix us? Not my family, not the house, just us. I thought about her question for a long time before I answered it, longer than felt comfortable for either of us, sitting there in a kitchen that wasn't fully mine yet, in a life that didn't feel like it belonged to either of us anymore. I don't know, I finally said. You lied to me for 3 years, Jennifer. You put your family's comfort ahead of our marriage every single time it mattered. That's not something I can just decide to forget because you told the truth once, under pressure, at a dinner table. I understand, she said quietly. But I want to try. I want to be the wife you deserved from the beginning, not the one who spent 3 years managing everyone's feelings but yours. We'll need counseling, I said. Real counseling, not a formality. Somewhere we actually talk about all of it, the lying, the family dynamics, the way you've spent your whole life prioritizing their comfort over your own marriage. I'll do it, she said immediately. Whatever it takes. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, all soft lighting and neutral furniture designed to feel unthreatening, though nothing about those sessions ever actually felt that way. She didn't pull punches, and I respected her for it, even when her questions landed somewhere uncomfortable for both of us. Jennifer, she said during our 3rd session, her legal pad resting on her knee, you've spent 3 years constructing an elaborate story to protect your family's feelings. My question is, who was protecting Kyle's? Jennifer didn't have an answer. She sat there with her hands folded in her lap, staring at a spot on the carpet like it might offer her one. It was our 5th session, though, that I still think about most, because that was the one where I watched the old pattern try to resurface right in front of both of us, and for a moment I genuinely didn't know which way it would break. We'd been talking about an upcoming Sunday dinner, the first real family gathering since Jennifer's confession. And Dr. Mitchell had asked how Jennifer planned to handle it if Patricia said something dismissive about my business again, the old habit of diminishing what I did for a living to keep Andrew looking better by comparison. I'd probably just let it go, Jennifer said. I don't want to start a whole thing at dinner. It's not worth the drama. I felt something tighten in my chest, old and familiar. That's exactly the problem, I said. That's the same instinct that got us here in the first place. Letting it go so nobody's uncomfortable except me. That's not fair, Jennifer said, her voice rising slightly. I'm trying not to make everything a battle, Kyle. I can defend you without turning every dinner into a courtroom. I'm not asking you to fight a war, I said. I'm asking you to say one sentence. That's not true, Mom, when she says something that isn't true. That's it, that's the whole ask. Dr. Mitchell let the silence sit for a moment before she spoke. Jennifer, I want you to notice something. Kyle just asked for one sentence, and your first response was to explain why that felt like too much. Where do you think that comes from? Jennifer's eyes filled, and for a second I thought she'd shut down the way she used to, retreat into apology without actually changing anything. Instead, she took a breath and said, because if I say it, and she gets that look on her face, the disappointed one, some part of me still turns into a 12-year-old who just wants her mother's approval. Even now, even knowing everything I know. That's honest, Dr. Mitchell said. That's more honest than you've been in this room in 5 sessions. I watched Jennifer sit with that, watched her wipe her eyes with the back of her hand, and something in me eased slightly, not fully, not all at once, but enough to notice. I don't need you to go to war for me at every dinner, I said, quieter now. I need to know that when it matters, you'll choose the truth over her comfort. That's different from picking a fight. That's just not lying anymore. I can do that, Jennifer said. I think I can actually do that now. Patricia reached out to me a few weeks later, asking to meet for coffee, and I agreed more out of curiosity than any real willingness to forgive her yet. She was already at the small table near the window when I arrived, and she looked different than I remembered, smaller somehow. The confidence that had once filled every room she walked into noticeably absent. Kyle, I owe you an apology, she said, her voice unsteady in a way I'd never heard from her. What I said to you that morning, the assumptions I made standing in your own office, they were cruel, and they were completely wrong. They were, I agreed, because I wasn't interested in making this easy for her. Jennifer told me everything, Patricia continued. The house, the money, the way we all just believed whatever Andrew told us without ever questioning it. I keep going over that morning in my head, standing there telling you to be gracious about leaving your own home. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I feel like a fool. You should feel like a mother who played favorites for 37 years, I said. Because that's exactly what you did. Her hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. You're right, I did favor him. I always have, since he was small, and I never once stopped to ask what that cost everyone else in the family. What it cost you. I let the silence stretch between us before I spoke again. Is there anything I can do to make this right? She finally asked. Stop comparing your children, I said. Stop deciding who's succeeding and who isn't based on whatever story is easiest for you to believe. And stop inserting yourself into my marriage. If Jennifer and I are going to rebuild anything, it has to happen without you hovering over every decision we make. She nodded slowly, and there was none of her old certainty in it. I can do that. We'll see, I said, standing to leave. Actions matter more than words, Patricia. You'll understand if I'm not ready to take yours on faith yet. 3 months after that Saturday morning that had upended everything, Jennifer and I stood in the small, glass-walled office of a title company downtown, signing the paperwork on a new house together. It was smaller than Riverside Park, older, with hardwood floors that creaked in places and a kitchen that needed updating, but every line on that deed had both our names on it, side by side, no hidden owner, no story we were keeping from anyone. Jennifer's hand was steady when she signed her name. Mine was too. When the title officer slid the paperwork across the desk for the last signature, Jennifer looked over at me and said, quiet enough that only I could hear it, this one's real. Yeah, I said, this one's ours. 6 months have passed since the morning Patricia Donovan stood in my office and told me to be gracious about leaving my own house, and it's strange to look back now and realize how much that single conversation ended up reshaping every part of my life that mattered. My business is thriving in a way I never expected. Turns out when you stop spending your emotional energy managing other people's perceptions of you, you have a startling amount of focus left over for the work that actually matters. I hired a third analyst last month. We're seriously considering opening a second office downtown, something that would have felt impossible 3 years ago, back when I was quietly funding a family's entire lifestyle while they debated whether my consulting income could even cover an apartment. Patricia has changed, in the ways that actually count. She calls before she visits now, every time, no exceptions. She stopped ranking her children against each other like it's some ongoing competition only she's keeping score of. It's not perfect. Old habits don't die in a single coffee shop apology, and I still catch traces of the old Patricia sometimes, a comment here, an assumption there, but she catches herself now, too, which is more than I ever expected from her. Andrew and Stephanie had their baby, a girl they named Emma. I sent a gift, because I'm not interested in punishing an infant for her father's choices. I didn't go to the hospital. Some distances, once they're drawn, are worth keeping. Andrew and I aren't close, and I don't think we ever will be, but we're civil now, which given everything, feels like more than enough. Michael turned out to be the family's quiet surprise. He'd spent years on the periphery of all their drama, watching everything unfold without much of a voice in it. And it turns out he'd been paying closer attention than any of us realized. He's become, unexpectedly, one of the people I trust most in that family, the one who tells the truth even when it's inconvenient, the one who never once asked me to make things easier for everyone else. Jennifer and I are still together. We're not the same two people who moved into that house in Riverside Park 3 years ago, and I don't think we'd want to be. Some days rebuilding trust feels effortless, like we've found a rhythm that actually belongs to both of us. Other days it's harder, slower, full of small moments where the old patterns threaten to resurface and we have to choose, deliberately, to do something different instead. But we keep choosing it. That's the part that matters. I kept the downtown apartment. Even after Jennifer and I moved into our new house together, the one with both our names on the deed, I never gave it up. I told her it was practical, a backup, a smart financial decision given the market. That was partly true, but if I'm honest with myself, it was never really about practicality. It was about having a place that existed entirely because of a decision I made for myself, on a day when everyone in my life seemed to think my only job was to disappear quietly and let someone else's story stand in for mine. I still go there sometimes, alone, late in the evening. Tonight is one of those nights. I'm standing at the same floor-to-ceiling windows I stood at the night everything fell apart, watching the city lights scatter and shimmer across the surface of the river below. The same view that greeted me the first night I unpacked boxes in silence, not knowing yet how any of this would end. The apartment is quiet, the city isn't. Somewhere out there, 6 months and a lifetime away, is a house with both our names on it, a family slowly learning what honesty actually costs and what it's worth, and a version of me that used to believe keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping his dignity. I know now that it isn't. I know that some peace isn't peace at all, just silence wearing a nicer name, and I know that the moment I stopped accepting less than I deserved was the same moment everything around me, painfully, unevenly, but genuinely, started to become real. My name is Kyle Harrison. I'm the man who got kicked out of his own house. But more importantly, I'm the man who decided he deserved better, and did something about it.